Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Content to Play Villain. In this episode, I'll be discussing the feared and respected character Tony Soprano from the TV series The Sopranos. This episode will be broken down into 4 parts. Firstly, who Tony Soprano is. 2, the evil things that he did. 3, why he did those things. And 4, my opinion if the evil things he did were justified. I hope you enjoy this episode and make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Let's get started. Tony Soprano was born August 22, 1959, in Newark, New Jersey. The second child in his family and the only son, his father was a captain in the DeMeo crime family. This meant that he was born into a life of crime and in an endless cycle of violence. Although he grew up in a life of crime, he didn't have to choose that path, as he could have furthered his studies in college and potentially had a successful sports career. He disregards both options to delve into the criminal mafia world. Tall, almost giant-like, physically imposing, intelligent, arrogant, selfish, and clearly a violent sociopath. Tony's villainy is rampant as his time as a member and later the boss of the fictional North Jersey DeMeo crime family, later called the Soprano family. He often displays behavior traits characteristic of a violent sociopath, struggles with depression, and is prone to panic attacks. The panic attacks are so severe that he is referred to a psychiatrist, who he begins to frequently see. Tony's time in the series show him balance the struggles of mental health, being the head of his household and, of course, running a criminal organization. All these factors play a part in molding Tony into the villain he had become in the series. But what makes Tony evil? Throughout the TV series, we first see Tony as a family man struggling with mental health to becoming an absolute brutal villain. He is responsible for the deaths of many, and in some cases did those deaths physically with his own hands. Throughout the series, people who entered Tony's orbit met their demise. Apart from murder, he is guilty of many other things, such as drug dealing, theft, cheating on his wife, and racism. When it comes to murder, a few killings stand out that show the brutality of Tony. Tony Soprano murders his own nephew Christopher Moltisanti by suffocating him after Christopher himself causes a car crash as he is driving Tony home while high. Christopher had problems with drug and alcohol addictions, and Tony doubts his nephew's loyalty and suitability to be his successor, and he fears that Christopher's immaturity and frequent drug problems make him a ripe target for the FBI. Christopher's efforts to stay clean of drugs and alcohol cause him to spend less time at their regular hangouts, further arousing Tony's suspicions. The car crash caused by Chris being high gave Tony the perfect excuse to murder him. Now, it's one thing murdering your own blood, but it's another pretending to Chris's family and consoling them for the loss. One of Tony's evil moments is the utter callousness and coldness that he carries himself at Chris's funeral, a grief-filled event that he is directly responsible for. He never shows any remorse for the killing of what was practically his son at this point. This is pure evil and showcases Tony as a sick manipulator. Another example of Tony's outrageous murders is the killing of Tony Blundetto, Tony's cousin and one of his childhood friends. After Tony Blundetto botched a murder, and a gang war was brewing as a result, Tony Soprano murders Tony Blundetto, shooting him in the head to give him a quick death. This was to avoid him being tortured. At this point in time, it is clear that Tony does not have a problem doing the dirty job of killing his own family members, and what this means is that he is probably a sociopath that doesn't have any feelings, aside from calling for the heads of people and doing murders himself. Tony is a serial cheater who cheats on his wife multiple times with sex workers and has several mistresses throughout the series. His wife Carmela was okay with it until it started to affect the kids. That's when she got mad. When one of his mistresses, Irina, called the house, that was the deal breaker for Carmela, because in her mind the kids should never be anywhere near the mob, and that includes side chicks. This shows Tony to be a selfish, self-centered man who only puts his pleasure first. He also had sexual relations with women Carmela knew or met. He almost sleeps with Adriana La Cerva, who is the longtime girlfriend and, later, fiancé of Tony Soprano's nephew, Christopher Moltisanti. Tony and his crew were a menace to society, engaging in auto theft, bank fraud, bid rigging, bookmaking, building violations, calling card fraud, cement violations, construction violations, credit card fraud, drug trafficking, and more. Tony is also a hardcore racist, having deep prejudice towards black people. Such examples were being annoyed with his daughter dating a man named Noah that was half black. He calls him an Italian racial slur and has a word with Noah, letting him know he doesn't want no black guy near his daughter. You could sum up Tony in the following words: he kills without remorse, but at the same time makes himself a victim. What do I mean that he makes himself a victim? His trips to his psychiatrist to help with his problems presents a figure that appears to be victimized by the harsh realities of life, but instead it really is just to relieve the stress and guilt he experienced from his violent evil actions. Throughout the series, his psychiatrist Jennifer Melfi tries, in an unbiased and non-judgmental way, to guide Tony to change his actions. But often Tony's sessions enabled him to justify himself to continue his criminal acts. The audience understands that Tony had a terrible childhood, so when we see him do reprehensible things, such as commit violence or cheat on his wife, we find ways to excuse or downplay it. That's because Tony revels in being the victim, often by him saying to himself, "Why does this always happen to me?" It's a classic case of a man who is evil but at the same time wants sympathy. Why was Tony Soprano evil? Or in other words, why was he content to play villain? We see a young Tony corrupted by his family over time and the consequences of that upbringing. We see how, generationally, misery is spread and passed down. Tony may be a victim of his environment and to a degree circumstance. This is what his family did. This is what he knows. In his heart, he may be a good person, but does bad things due to the family he was raised in. During one therapy session, his psychiatrist Jennifer Melfi and Tony experience a breakthrough, finally understanding that Tony's panic attacks happened because he witnessed his father commit horrible crimes and his mother responded to them callously. However, this is no excuse for being a terrible human being. Seeing the intent and malice in Tony's actions, seeing the murders he committed of his own blood, seeing the racism and the cheating makes Tony an evil villain. Because did what mob bosses do, make money via any means necessary, cause terror, flood your community with poison, and commit murder. Were any of the acts he did justified? Perhaps. He felt it was in his right to eliminate threats before they become a problem. However, it is his overall profile that makes him up there amongst the ruthless villains in history. He's calculating, ruthless, sociopathic, unapologetic, and extremely narcissistic. There are also hints throughout the show that life inside the mob isn't always what Tony imagined for himself. Before dropping out of college as a freshman, he pondered continuing in school and making a career in sports instead. As an adult, he still has nightmares about his former coach reprimanding him for not focusing on sports. It's evident Tony had a moral compass back then and, to some extent, regrets not following it. He knew what the life of crime entails and chose that path. He chose the path of evil,